Good afternoon and welcome to Art Toronto 2019, and thank you for joining us for the first of our Power Talk series presented by the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery. We're so happy that they've partnered with us once again at the fair this year. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land that we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to gather here today, and I'd like to introduce Josh Human of the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery to say a few words.
Great, thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Josh Human. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery. For the 13th year, we are pleased to present 3 Power Talks during Art Toronto, thanks to the support of Art Toronto, with special thanks to Mia Nielsen and her team. The Power Plant, located at Harbourfront Centre just a few blocks south of here, presents exhibitions by Canadian and international artists, predominantly emerging and mid-career artists who have not had a solo exhibition in Toronto or Canada. Our Fall 2019 exhibitions, currently on view through January 5th, 2020, feature Canadian artist Hajra Wahid, Belgian artist Vincent Mizan, Bangladeshi British artist Naeem Mohayeman, and a new commission by American artist Rashid Johnson. The Power Plant's booth here at Art Toronto features a limited edition tote bag by Rashid Johnson and publications related to recent exhibitions. To complement exhibitions each season, we offer numerous education and public programs, so if you haven't already, please check out our website, thepowerplant.org. Today, we present the first of 3 Power Talks speakers, each corresponding to Art Toronto's Focus Portugal. Before I introduce today's speaker, I hope to entice you to attend the next 2. Tomorrow at 4 p.m., Lisbon-based artist Angela Ferrara will focus on projects concerned with developing metaphoric and political statements from critical investigations into the relationship between buildings, films, music, and the ongoing impact of colonialism, post-colonialism, and neo-colonialism on contemporary society. And on Sunday at 2:30 p.m., Denise Ferreira da Silva, professor and director of the Social Justice Institute at the University of British Columbia, explores what happened to the thesis of the possibility or impossibility of justice when considered through artistic practice, referring to works by contemporary artists including Carlos Mota, Otobong Nkanga, and Paulo Nazareth. But turning to today's speaker, Rita Fabiana has been head of programming at the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum since March 2016. She has curated exhibitions of emerging, mid-career, and established Portuguese and international artists, including Ana Jota, Ricardo Valentim, Leonor Antunes, Ito Barada, Tulia Saldana, and José Escada. She is currently co-curating a project by Manon de Boer and Zineb Sidira. She has written artist monographs, contributed to exhibition catalogs, and taught graduate studies on curatorial practices. So for her talk entitled, How is the Institutional Performing Today? Please welcome Rita Fabiana.
Good afternoon. Thank you to you all to be here. And of course, thank you to PowerPoint to inviting me to be here to talk about how is the institutional performing today. And of course, the case will be the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon, where I'm working. The title refers to a symposium at MoMA held in 2012 entitled How Are We Performing Today? It focused on performance and its evolving relationship within the museum. The symposium looked at the subject of performance, migrations from the margin to the center of contemporary arts and museum discourse. Largely, it was about the persistent reality of margins and centers in museum practice, but also in museum narratives, display, and audiences. And I would also add to these the questions: who is producing knowledge and narratives in museums today, and for whom is the museum working? Who are the museum audiences? In other words, I regard this frame as an important inquiry into how the museum, or should I say the institutional, can engage in issues and strategies to actively respond to subjects of representation, inclusiveness, and cultural diversity. By looking at Gulbenkian Museum in recent years as a Portuguese and European museum, this lecture aims to evaluate how the museum has been responding to urgent questions of gender, migration, and colonial history and its legacy today, through curatorial practice, exhibition programming, new acquisition and narratives, and policies of display. The departing point of this lecture is my personal experience, an experience shared and built in collaboration with my colleagues from the museum staff and with other organizations and associations outside the museum structure. I must say that even if change are in course, it's crucial to reject the feeling of satisfaction because we need to keep our focus and work hard. There is so many things yet to be done. I'm thinking here on the words of the curator Modest Wayne from the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam, who recently said in a talk at Gulbenkian that we need to keep a sense of discomfort, to be alert, because what we have to do is not an easy mission. It calls for constant courage and engagement. So the institution, the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum and its modern collection is part of the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation that was created in 1956 by the last will and testament of Calouste Sarkis Gulbenkian, a philanthropist of Armenian origin who lived in Lisbon between 1942 and 1945, the year of his death. Established in perpetuity, the Foundation's main purpose is to improve quality of life through art, charity, science, and education. The Foundation directs its activities from its headquarters in Lisbon and its delegation in Paris and London. The Foundation has a museum which houses the founder private collection, a collection that comprises works from ancient Egypt and 19th century European art, including an important collection of Islamic art, and houses in a separate building a collection of modern and contemporary art created after Gulbenkian's death. Since 2016, the Gulbenkian Museum brings together both the founder and the modern collections, building and teams, and of course, this has opened new possibilities and questions about how to build new narratives, crossing culture and crossing time, in the permanent display and in the exhibition programming that are being worked. But I mainly focus on the modern collection. The modern collection was officially founded in 1983, but includes work of art acquired by the Gulbenkian Foundation since 1958. Often described as the most important collection of Portuguese modern art from the 20th century, mainly from the first half of the century, the collection comprises almost 11,000 artworks today. Framed by a historical conception of the 20th century modernist art, the modern collection was created to integrate the largest possible number of artists, and I underline this, whose works reflect ideals and interests prevailing since the late 19th century to today. And the question is, all artists? In this sense, historically, it did not seek to include artworks of a markedly academic or naturalistic character, nor artworks or studies for works of public art carried out during the political regime of Estado Novo, the dictatorship period between 1926 and 1974. The modern collection created by the Gulbenkian Foundation represented in many ways an alternative space and collection to the academic art and to the art produced by and for the Portuguese dictatorship. And so the modern collection is deeply connected with the conception of modernist art, but also with the values of democracy. So the Modern Art Center, its original name, acts to consolidate the modern collection and make it more representative of the history of modern Portuguese art, while still featuring international highlights. Such international works were acquired as a result of the Gulbenkian Foundation activities in countries such as the United Kingdom or in France, where specific circumstances brought Portuguese artists to a close contact with the British and French artistic context, notably the diaspora of exile. For example, the artist José Escada that I will speak about. Other international works include those of the Armenian-American painter Achille Gorky, as well as a set of Iraqi works acquired in the 60s in the context of the Gulbenkian Foundation intense philanthropic activities in Iraq, which can be described as a kind of soft diplomacy given Calouste Gulbenkian historical relationship with the oil resources in Iraq. Recently, in 2018, the museum organized an exhibition on precisely this subject in our conversation program. And art and oil was also the theme of our summer exhibition, The Rise of Islamic Art, on Calouste's collecting of Middle Eastern art in historical context. The modern collection is so an open collection, while the founder is a closed one, and so modern acquisitions are an important mission of the museum. By evaluating this process recently, it has been possible to understand better how the collection was assembled, as well as the lacunas or the gap that this collection has produced, motivated by formal and aesthetic consideration, or possibly of canonical and hegemonic taste, and motivated by social and cultural inequalities anchored in Portuguese history. Filling these gaps and lacunas is a central focus of our acquisition policy today, together with giving attention to contemporary production, so the collection remains relevant to artists of younger generations. The exhibition programming has been and continues to be an important driving force for national and international acquisition of the modern collection, serving often as a kind of memory of these events and activities. The permanent display of the collection, Other Narratives. Since 2017, the modern collection has a new permanent display organized according chronological periods that reflect Portuguese history and modern art history of the 20th century, which are specific. For example, in contrast with British, French or German modern art, Portuguese history is marked by an important military coup in 1926 that led to the establishment of the Estado Novo, the regime of dictatorship, that remained for almost 50 years until 1974, when the April Revolution brought about the arrival of democracy. This very long dictatorship also resulted in the maintenance of the colonial regime until this time, which was very late. Indeed, it was one of the last such regimes in Europe. The challenge for the museum now is how can we inscribe on this chronological organization other narratives? The missing narratives, such as the production of women artists who were for a long time forgotten or even erased, or the production of artists from diaspora, in order to give voice and image to other protagonists, challenging the canon and the long-time consensual and unique European male art history narratives. So the question is, how to reinforce a shared history? How to complicate the hegemonic narratives? At the beginning of 2019, this year, a new installation was proposed for the permanent display of modern collection, focusing on women artists, which was anchored to this chronological organization, reinforcing their presence and their alternative ways of making and thinking about art and life. and opening the exhibition to public debate and activities focusing on these issues. Symbolically, the exhibition display opens with the large installation Illusions 1 by the woman artist Rita Fabiana that we are seeing now, a recently acquired installation that addresses the museum as a white space, a white cube, where black bodies are absent, where black authors, artists and subjects are absent. An installation that talks about the white consensus. These remind us that we need to think and to act together on issues of gender, race, sexual orientation and class in an inclusive shared history and not produce continually a fractured history full of holes. And here I'm quoting the photographic work by the artist Itu Barrada called A Life Full of Holes, which examines the Strait of Gibraltar located between Europe and North Africa, addressing immigrant collective identity and its state of dispossession. For 2020, the museum is working on a new display for the collection focused on the themes of migration, diaspora and exile. Portugal is historically a country of immigration for artists as well as for people seeking better working and social conditions. Portugal is also a country with a recent colonial history that needs to be addressed collectively. These forgotten histories and bodies and forgotten artists are being more and more contested by the diaspora communities that want to be represented artistically, politically, socially, and want to be present in and part of our cultural institutions, museums and universities. An institution have the responsibility to answer to this call. These alternative narratives need to be followed and sustained by new artworks acquisitions that will ensure now and in the near future a more comprehensive representation of women artists and artists from the diaspora, inscribing these artists and their communities and histories on the priorities of curatorial research and on the priorities of the museum discourse. Although women artists have started to have a more significant presence in the modern collection and in its display and narratives, artists from the diaspora and from the African diaspora in particular still represent an important lacuna in the collection, most of whom only enter in very recent years, as Calouste Bunga, Grada Quilomba, Quilwajo Enda, and Eugenia Musa. But this is not only a problem of number of artists and artworks, it's a problem of words, and words matters, like Modest Twain said also. A problem of definition and categories like race, geography, national identities, gender, that call for a larger questioning about decolonization, how to decolonize our museum. And way is through curatorial practice and exhibition program that I will talk now. So, the first example of an exhibition about a curatorial practice is Tudo Saldanha, an exhibition that took place in 2014, was curated by Liliana Coutinho and myself. At the time, Liliana Coutinho was an independent curator. Tudo Saldanha was a woman artist. At the time of our research and exhibition, an almost unknown artist, mainly because she was a woman, like other women artists in Portugal and internationally, because she was born and lived until her 40s in a far region of the north of Portugal, inside a traditional marriage, but also because she had no academic formation, studies. Tulia worked in ways that were not always identified as art. She ran as a founder and director an artist space in the center of Portugal, Coimbra. She taught art to young convicts in prisons. Tulia really believed that art is an emancipatory act, an action. It was for her in the first place. Her artistic practice found new ways in collaborative work through collective performance, but also in an individual work strongly marked by happenings with food, performance, and ephemeral installation that she was one of the initiators in Portugal in the 70s. Tully worked intensively around the black as a color and as a transformed material by the action of fire. She carbonized objects and organic food that she used in her installation. The black was also a color for art space, an intentional non-white cube. She has created with other artists in the Art Center in Coimbra, where she was director, a black gallery for experimental exhibitions in 1969, where she presented her first installation and performed her work to 240, 118, 118 Disymetria Matter. This is already the artwork is this that I will speak more. So this is the set that we could see in the exhibition display, and this is some details of, come back. So here, this is the photograph of a performance, and this is the photograph detail of that. So in 1979, Túlio Saldanha accepted the challenge to create a piece for a collective exhibition in which the common starting point was a box, and a set of dimensions measuring 24, 18, 18. Saldanha responded with a performance installation which dealt with extended time of creation and reception. In the Black Gallery, wearing black, the artist enters an open wooden box 40 times larger than the original box, transforming it into a receptacle on the scale of her own body. She is motionless, facing the viewers, gazing at them firmly. Then a progressive closing of the box takes place. 24 models are put in place, and each of these actions to close the box is photographed. But the rhythm of closure is suddenly interrupted in the last two models, at her eye level, as we see here. Saldanha tackles the top of the box, unexpectedly prolonging while the shutter is pressed 5 more times. This meeting of gaze, of one who sees, but who also wants to be seen. A transforming gaze which seems to say to us, I exist, I am here. A box, a coffin in fact, yet on which, like her burned still life, is both death and destruction and life through transformation. Dissymetria matter is an act of resistance against erasure, against forgetting, through presence. Can we see this as yet another gesture relating to the liberation of the individual? An individual who is another searching for a space for intervention and artistic inscription? And might the symmetria matter thus be countered by a symmetria pater of equals? The research and the exhibition allowed literally to give visual existence to Túlio Saldanha's work and practice, allowing also her inscription in art history. The acquisition for the collection of some of her most relevant objects and installations, some ephemeral, that follow the exhibition guarantee that she can be seen and studied by other generations. José Escada. José Escada is an exhibition presented in 2016, the first survey and deep research dedicated to Escada life and work. Escada lived long time in Paris, in exile, because of his opposition to the dictatorship. He was authorized to return to Portugal only after '69. My main question was then, how can we revisit modern art history and artistic practice in order to propose alternative narratives? For example, from a modernist narrative about painting and abstraction and new figuration, he was known by that, to politics of body representation. The research allowed me to center his work on issues of homoerotic representation in a context of political repression and homosexual legal interdiction. The art is making the use of strategies of encryption. The bodies are presented but not fully visible. And we must think that homosexuality was a crime in Portugal until 1982. No, sorry. So what we are seeing, the first one, it's a painting that calls The Chained Man or Our Chains. Was painted in 1972, so 2 years before the revolution. And of course what we see is ropes and chains, bodies like in prison, or bodies as prisons. The body here embodied the oppression power. The second one is an Untitled, but it's clearly a prison. The body here has become a prison in literally. And this paroxysm of a state of oppression and the full awareness of the oppressed body, a body as an identity construction. So, and it's interesting because, of course, I'm only showing works of the 70s, and of course, it's someone that started in the 50s, in the 60s, and we can find this encryption that I was talking about much more in the 60s, but in the early 70s. Escada starting to do these chains, bodies, and so he addressed more clearly these problems of oppression. And it's really very interesting because it's just before the revolution. But this painting and collage that calls 20 April, this is the date of the revolution, and he painted in 1974. It's already something else. It's the celebration of the revolution and the freedom won. The celebration of bodies and homosexual relation in the city public space. And it was a mark because in the context of LGBTQ in Portuguese community, in a blog wrote that it was the first time that an exhibition in Portugal, an artistic survey, addresses clearly homosexuality identity and homoerotic representation. The next exhibition project is an exhibition by António Wall called Luanda, Los Angeles and Lisbon, held in the Modern Collection in 2016. Was an exhibition curated by Isabel Carlos and myself, and it was a survey dedicated to António Wall, that is an Angolan and Portuguese artist, what we could call a son of the colonialism, as a conference that was held in Lisbon recently about sons of colonialism. I started with a quotation of the curator Cuoco, that she said, we need to complicate the narratives. And this project with António Wall was very important for me as a curator, because in fact, António Wall comes and complicates narratives in a very striking way. The Wall work deals with issues of history, a common history about memory, trauma. He creates an image to tell and show things that are unbearable. And the artwork that we are seeing here is calling Hidden Pages, Stolen Bodies. It's a large installation that addresses the theme of slavery and forced labor that Wall was one of the first artists to deal with. The colonial violence against bodies, the deprivation of rights over a body that has become a tradable good. So this idea of stolen lives and stolen bodies, but also about silence, a silence history, so stolen pages. The installation assembled official documents from national Portuguese and Angolan archives, suppressed from collective memory, showing also bodies of young black men that were in the center of the slavery trade. I think I'm not too fast. I'm too fast? No, okay. So this is again Hidden Pages, Stolen Bodies. So let's come for exhibition programming, and in particularly a cycle of programming that I'm very attached to is the project space. And I will speak about the programming that the project space held in 2019. And again, I do a lot of questions because it's a good starting point. And the question is how a curatorial practice can become a programming strategy to address in continuity issues of colonial history and memory, decoloniality, and the African Portuguese diaspora communities. The space project as a space in the modern collection appears affirmed to produce and show projects of contemporary artists, Portuguese and international, was entirely devoted in 2019 to artists that are, through their works and practice, addressing contemporary issues, urgent questions about colonial and post-colonial history, decoloniality, diaspora, crossing also issues of gender, sexuality, and class. And the first artists that exhibit in project space in 2019 was Ito Barada, with an exhibition called Moi je suis la langue et vous êtes les dents. Donc I am the tongue and you are the teeth. An exhibition built between the tongue and the teeth. Tongue is the organ that produces language as power source, the colonial language as the French that represent oppression and law, and the teeth as an organ of ingestions, heating, that ritualize both the internalization of power and order and the emancipation of the colonized subjects, so an act of resistance. Sometimes I'm very French, sorry. I'm more francophone than anglophone. An exhibition built on the words of women, and the first was the French ethnographer Thérèse Rivière, and on words of colonized women as her grandmother and her mother. It was a very woman telling story exhibition. The exhibition mobilized a program discussion with African Diaspora Association and collectives, mainly Association of Black Portuguese Women and Feminist Association, that were the starting points to gather a group of activists that are involved in the organization of an international meeting to debate colonialism, post-colonialism, and black feminism that will happen in the museum in November, called Where We Stand. So I will not speak about Philippe Serre's exhibition, was the second one, and I will go directly to Irineu de Tourelle, because I'm mostly speaking of exhibitions that are curate, so I'm more close to this project. So Irineu de Tourelle, I don't know if you can see. So this is a video in multiple screens in a single projection, but I will come back. So Irineu de Tourelle, it's a Portuguese and a Cape Verde-born artist. He lives in Cape Verde for Portugal with his family at the age of 4. His work talks about the colonial past that continues to be performed in the present through a discursive violence, provoking anxiety, isolation, and vulnerability in these communities that need to negotiate and translate permanently different spaces, language, cultural, social, and political structures. It's also about the effect of this violence in these communities. And it's de Tourelle that are speaking that mental illness, for example, touched strongly the second and the third generation of the diaspora, and he has a work in the exhibition that deals with that. But also, let's think about his name, Irineu de Tourelle. Irineu constructs an artistic persona. In fact, it's not his name as a person. He creates this persona, this artistic persona. And he creates this Irineu de Tourelle. So de Tourelle, he takes it from a woman, Clémence de Tourelle, a Creole woman from Martinique, and the wife of Arthur Gobineau, the author of Essai sur l'inégalité des races, published in foundational text of the process of naturalization of race and racism. So what we are seeing here, it's a video that calls several ways of falling over differently in 2019. This is a video, So this is a performance because it's the artist itself that are facing a fixed camera and is falling continually in different ways. And the video is in how do we say? It's not in the real time. So it's how do you say? In slow motion. In slow motion. And this idea that the artist, of course, is facing this vulnerability and this violence through the body of this of the diaspora individual person, but at a certain point, do it in slow motion, is also saying that he's falling, but he's controlling his own fall. Of course, it's also important when we look where is filming this performance, is filming in his father garden, and of course we can also see these issues of is in a space outside, but an interior space of the house, and the house, of course, it's also a very important issue in the artwork of Irineu de Torrel. And we can see that in this other work that calls 102 Houses on Fire, also of 2019. And this is a video that shows continuously these 102 houses on fire. Of course, it shows these houses very isolated landscape, these very geometrical houses, and we know that they are on fire because we can see through the closed doors and the closed windows this smoke, this fire that are coming inside, this internal combustion. I don't know how to say it, sorry. He addressed also these issues of the house, but also is looking at these memories that he has of the 80s in Portugal, where he was in Portugal, in a country that was recently entering the European community, were a moment of a lot of energy, pop singing in Portuguese. People was very excited to be part of the European community countries, but at the same time, Africa and Angola in particular was on fire, was with a civil war, and it was very important and it's very striking for Irineu de Torrel. So this houses on fire is also this image of African on fire. So for the show, Irineu produced 4 new videos for the exhibition, and all the titles are very striking and at the same time very literal. The other, I don't bring image, but the one calls ex-colonial landscape with different filters, and the last one calls supernatural forces, mental health, and details from indoors. So I thought I had no time to speak about this, but finally I was quite quick. So just a little, a last work. In fact, I said that the space protest started with Ito Barada, but before, coming from the 1918, we had a project with Ana Jota and Ricardo Valenti. Ana Jota is an artist that is an important woman artist in Portugal, and from an old generation. Ricardo Valenti is a quite young artist, and had this work together that they were since 2010, and they wanted to show in an institution. They were looking to someone to work with them, and of course these works calls from A to C. It's about other institutional resistance, and of course this is practice that are related with the mining the museum. this was a very enthusiastic work, a very hard one, but I must say that I was very fond and at the same time, all the time, very enthusiastic and worried too. The work of the duo António and Ricardo Valenti addresses the questions: how can the art practice hand over the museum invisible structures? How we are as a labor space, as we are as a social space producing relations and a set of rules applied in galleries, spaces, as label, text, catalogs, applies to ways of museum communication with audiences. Their work are mimicking and miming the museum rules, literally. An exhibition, the exhibition project calls from A to C, and of course it's also a very humoristic way to see this, from Anna to Valentin to Ricardo, and this A to C, it's also to say everything is here. It's not to A to Z, but everything about exhibition is in this exhibition, in this project. And in the context of this exhibition, they produced an artist book that we are seeing called Moer. In English, we can translate it as mill, grind, or crush. And Moer could be understood as a process of mill authorships, but also to submit the museum rules, strategies, methodologies to the action of mill. And I must say that is something like to breaking the museum patience too. It was quite a thing. The publication that is formally and graphically an exact copy of a book edition from Gulbenkian Foundation dedicated since the 60s to Portuguese culture and civilization, includes work, correspondence, and other diverse materials revealing common interests and ideas that the two artists have been discussing since they met in 2010, with a lot of humor and irony, pointing some persistent ideas about culture and institutional identity. Thank you.
Great. So thank you so much for your talk. I have this microphone. I'll wander around if anyone has questions. Just put up your hand.
Yeah, if someone wants to, even if, because they didn't understand, because sometimes my English is a little tricky.
Thank you for your talk and introduction to your museum. I was interested in something you said right at the beginning, actually, when you were introducing your museum, and you talked about some shows I think you had that related the oil foundation or money in connection to the museum, and I'm really interested in that topic right now, and I'm wondering how that was an exhibition, was
Yes, it was our summer exhibition. In fact, it closed 1 week ago, and the idea was, as I said in the presentation, I'm not the expert in this matter. It was another colleague of the museum that created the show. But the starting point was that we had a very important collection of Islamic art. But of course, nowadays the museum, but not only Gulbenkian Museum, feels the need to understand what is about Islamic art, because this is again about words, how we create categories. And this is finally a quite recent one, Islamic art. It was Arabic art, Persian art. It changed around the 20th century. But it was also to understand how this rise of Islamic taste was profoundly linked to oil business, and Gulbenkian fortune was done with oil. And of course, we wanted, with courage, also address this question about this kind of second colonialism that came with the business oil in the Middle East. So the exhibition was also, we wanted really to speak about these questions. And for example, the exhibition showed that how the collecting of Gulbenkian was profoundly linked to the oil business, and the moment where we won more money was also the moment when he buy more artworks. So it was a little polemic, but we wanted to go and to treat, because until now was only the collection was only treated as beautiful objects and art historian critique and essays, and
It seems like a very courageous or brave
yes,
thing to do.
yes, yeah. It's I must say that it's the team of Gulbenkian Museum, but also the director Penelope Curtis that is aware and supporting these ways of working differently. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? I'll pitch a question out. I'm wondering, so the title of your talk is about institutional sort of performing. So what are some ways, other than exhibiting artwork, that artists perform within the institution at the Calouste Gulbenkian in terms of talks or other engagement with the public?
I could address this issue. Of course, we have an educational department, and I must say that as a head of programming, I'm working very close to my colleague Susana Gomes da Silva. It's an ally and an accomplice on these questions. I must say that the educational program in Gulbenkian are very strong and they are working in a way is very courageous. And as a curator, for example, I feel very supported by colleagues of educational. They are doing a great job, and for example, when I speak about this international meeting where we stand, I'm working close to the educational program as much of the associated program. It has been a very important way of working, and I didn't have time. But for example, even in curatorial practice, for example, I invite my colleague Susana Gomes da Silva to curate a show. I will be co-curating with her because she's not feeling in her how do you say
in her element.
So she asked me to help her. But for example, for the project of Manon de Boer, a Dutch artist that is doing a project about education, not education. She's interested on process of knowledge. How can we, as nothing, and construct something related to informal artistic formation, for example. And I invite my colleague Susana to work with her, because what we wanted to do is we need also to think about what is curating a show, what is the role of a curator. For example, for Túlia Saldanha, with Liliana Coutinho, half of the time curating the show was about what is a curator, how can we do this, because curatorship is seen as an author, so author is authority. How can also shake the idea of a curatorship, for example, this practice. So I wanted that Susana bring her own methodology from educational programming and work differently with the artist. And for a year, we produced entirely a new work of Manon. And for long, people were pushing me, said, invite her to do an exhibition in Gulbenkian, invite her. I said, no. I don't want to invite Manon, because I really want that she's completely focused on producing the work and not with this anxiety to think on a space. Let her work, and let her work in different ways with someone that is not a curator. And it was a fantastic experience. So now we invite her next year to do a show, but she's did the work before. So, and of course, artists are often invited to do talks and to do guided visits. And yes, we have much more things to do that have been done, but the idea is to make things and change.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for your talk today. We really appreciate it. One more question.
Hi there. I don't know if you covered this, and forgive me if you did, but I'm just wondering what your institution's collecting policy is. If you have an acquisitions budget, and if so, what are you focusing on right now?
Yeah, this is, I addressed this in the first part of my talk, because acquisition, it's a very important instrument of precisely thinking these issues of equality and representation. Gulbenkian has a budget, modern collection, because the Fauna collection is a closed collection, and is perhaps one of the only institution in Portugal that since its beginning never stopped to acquiring artworks. Of course, I also spoke about this idea that the collection, the modern collection, was to include all the artists that represented 20th century practice, and but what we are doing in recent years is studying what we acquired, what the collection is really, and the most important, what is missing in the collection. And we did all the curators of the modern collection this research to understand and try to understand what it was, these gaps, and why. And of course, filling these gaps for us now it's one of the most important strategy for the museum, because of course if we don't we can speak about exhibitions and the permanent display, but the permanent display is created with artworks that are already there. If they are not there, we cannot do different things. And of course, it's also a question of justice. If it's a collection that's addressed to all the artists, or almost all the artists that represent and produce in the 20th century, you must really to address to all artists. Okay, it's a hard job, but a good one. Thank you.
Well, great. Well, thank you again to Rita Fabiana for this fantastic talk. Please, everyone, give her some